Okay, good. Y'all, I thought we'd do something a little different tonight. This is exciting. Edge of your seat kind of stuff here.
I'm on there.
I'm going to tie through the fly first, all the way, because it's only about a 4 or 5 minute tie. So you can see the whole tie, but because sometimes when we're tying, it's like, okay, where do we go here? Do we put the thread forward or backward and kind of thing? Kind of like teaching, Ronnie, in our classroom. We do the example first. So what I'll do is I'll tie through one, and I'm sure it'll be the worst copy I've ever tied if I do it by myself in front of you. So let's, yeah, appreciate that. This is the cat's whisker, and Chris Williams recommended this fly to us and said it's become really popular with East Texas fly fishers for white bass, or barfish as we call it here. It's originally a still water trout pattern, and but I can't help but believe the way it looks, it would work for, of course, our white bass, but almost anything like a fluff butt jig kind of pattern. It uses bead chain eyes, some type of like Estaz or ice dub chenille and marabou, and that's pretty much all the materials for the fly. So let's get to tying here.
What's the hook, Bill?
This hook is a Gamakatsu B10s in size 8, but I think the pattern's pretty agnostic to what fly or what hook you use. I think almost anything will work, and various sizes. I just chose it because, one, I like the hook a lot. It's a really, really sharp hook, and it's a strong hook. So if you take this somewhere and hook into a big fish, even on this size 8, I don't think you'll have any trouble. So I first go ahead and I lay down an entire hook shaft of thread base, and then I leave my thread hanging at, I want it about 1.5 eye lengths back, because I'm going to tie my bead chain eyes in about 1.5 eye lengths back there. So that's an eye, and that's about a half. So that should be about right, because I need room at the front to tie in that Estaz. So to tie the eye in, I just hold it at an angle. Hold it at an angle on the hook, and I like to give it just 3 or 4 snug but not tight wraps, and then straighten it out and give it 3 or 4 more in the other direction, and then just do a few figure 8s. And then I like to do, I don't know if there's an official name, but I call them stirrup wraps, because that's kind of what they look like. Over the top of one side, under the hook, over the top of the other side, under the hook, over the top, under, over, under. Do that 3 or 4 times, and then finally a cinch wrap at the top, where I wrap horizontally under the eyes but on top of the hook. And that really snugs that eye down. Okay, tail is marabou, and we're using white. And because we're snugging this marabou up against the eye, I like to trim it. And the length of the tail is totally up to you, but I like about 1.5 hook shaft length, so I'm going to trim it right about there. And we just tie that in and wrap it back to just above the barb of the hook. And that's our tail. And then we'll bring our thread back and leave it hanging about the point. And the next material is the Estaz, and again, I just chose Estaz. You can choose pretty much any material you like. And I like to strip a few of the fibers off and expose that core, and then wrap that back to right at the base of your tail, and then bring your thread forward, whoops, to just behind the eyes. Right there. And then we wrap it. And I like to sweep it like I do Hackle. Each time I take a wrap of Estaz, it keeps you from wrapping on top of the fibers quite as much. And so I wrap to just behind the eye, then take a couple of wraps of thread over the Estaz and tie it down, and don't cut the Estaz off yet. Leave it hanging. And next we'll tie our wing in, which is more marabou. And we want it about the same length as our tail, so I'll trim it right about there. Get that trimmed. And then I tie it in on top of the Estaz, right behind the eyes. So just snug it down. The Estaz will get in the way a little bit, so just snug it down and tie it in right behind the eye. And give it some nice tight wraps here because it will pull out because it's a really short tying point because we're not tying very far back. I'm only tying, maybe an eighth of an inch of it there or so. All right, so that's tied in. And let me untwist my Estaz here. And so once the marabou is tied in, I've moved my thread in front of the eyes and then take one wrap behind the eyes to cover up all those thread wraps. And then I go under and forward and just make a figure 8 forward over the eye, under the eye, and back. So I just made a figure 8 over the eyes in front. And then I just tie down right in front. Trim that off. Hold it back. And no matter what you do with this stuff, you're going to tie down some of the fibers in the front. And that's pretty much it. Do your whip finish or your half hitch, whatever you like. I'm going to use a half hitch here because the nice thing about the half hitch tool with the little hole in the end, it actually helps push back those fibers, as you can see there. Pushes them back and clears the eye a little bit. And that's it. Quick and easy tie. So you can
tool that you just used to tie that with?
What's that?
Tool you use?
The tool I use to tie that with is it's really a bodkin that has a half hitch tool on the end of it, and it has a hole in the end.
So you just wrap it?
Yeah, just wrap the thread and you push it over the end and it pushes those fibers back out away from the eye. That's about the only time I ever use this tool is for this type of fly. And I am going to put a little cement on this one since I used half hitch instead of a whip finish. Go ahead and put a little Sally Hansen's hard as nails on it.
So Bill, would you put super glue on your eyes at the top?
You could, yeah. But I'm not sure about the durability of this fly. I haven't actually fished it yet.
Right.
I think about half a dozen white bass, and it's time for a new fly anyway. So I'm not, and that method of those stirrup wraps and then that wrap on top really cinches that eye down pretty well. So, all right, so let's try tying one together now. So, and you can certainly tie at your own speed if you like, but I am going to get a fresh hook and lay down a thread base all the way back. And you don't have to do that, but I just like to do it just because it helps keep those materials from spinning on that slick hook shaft.
Are you using 70 or 210?
I'm using 140. Yeah, I don't think it matters. I think 70 would work just fine. And hold those eyes at an angle, take 3 or 4 wraps, then reach and straighten. Trying to do it where I'm not in your camera view there. And do my stirrup wraps.
So Bill, with those dumbbell eyes on top, are you going to flip like a cloud?
I don't know if they're heavy enough to actually flip. There's a lot of buoyancy in the fly.
That marabou on top.
And it's got that marabou on top, so I don't know if it would actually flip or not. If it would flip like a clouser, your color scheme, of course, your green would then be on top. Now you could tie it with lead eyes too, small lead eyes, and it would probably flip. You could even tie it on a jig hook This would be really easy to tie on a jig hook with lead eyes on top of the jig hook. All right, now I'm going to do a little bit different. I don't like to waste marabou, so I'm just going to use one feather for this fly. And I'm going to tie the tail in first with the tip of the marabou. And then I'm going to use the body of the marabou to tie in the wing. So again, about 1.5, and I'm not,
Space behind that.
yep. So I'm going to trim it right here.
You use 1.5 of the hook length?
Yeah, about 1.5 of the shaft or hook. It's totally up to you, Mike. If you like longer tail, shorter tail. I'm going to just kind of wrap all that down. This one's a little bit longer than the last one I tied, but it's about woolly booger length. And then you just wrap the Estaz, strip off those outer fibers and expose the core. And I'll stop right there for a second.
How much do you have sticking out from the tail?
About a hook length, hook shaft length and a half. This one's a little longer than the other one, so let's see, that's probably a hook. So this one's, yeah, a little over, there's a hook length, about 1.5 actual hook lengths on this one, Ronnie. I don't think it matters. Just depends on whether you like, you know, kind of like woolly boogers. Do you like short tails or long tails on your woolly booger? This is kind of the same. But I think on this fly, a little bit longer tail looks a little better. All right, once we get the Estaz tied in, again, bring your thread back to just behind the eyes. And we will wrap our Estaz forward. And this is standard size Estaz. It's a little thinner material than Chrystal Flash chenille or some of the others. And I tie it off right behind the eye. Just a couple of wraps is fine. At this point, you could tie it off and fish it, and you would have something like a fluff butt with an Estaz body. Now for my wing, I'm going to actually use the same marabou feather, and I'm going to go down near the base of the feather and actually fold that feather over on itself and just grab two sides of that feather and just strip it off. And so I have a nice fuzzy piece of Estaz here. And I've, marabou. And you can use your thumb to kind of prune the long ends. And about the same length as the tail. Mine's a little short, but that is just fine. And take several wraps to make sure that wing is tied in nicely. And then move your thread to in front of the eyes. And this, the wing and tail look separate here, but when you get that in the water, they'll fold together. All right, and then we take a wrap, one wrap behind the eyes with our Estaz to cover up our thread wraps, and then a figure 8 forward over the eyes, under and back forward again. And then tie off our Estaz. And we are good to go. And again, I'm going to use my half hitch tool here to push that Estaz back over the eye so I don't crowd the eye, and do 2 or 3 half hitches. Very buggy looking fly. This is, and if you wanted a longer body, just use a longer shank hook. This is a fairly short shank stinger hook. So if you wanted a slightly longer Estaz body, you could certainly use a longer hook. All right, how we doing? Good.
You tie the Estaz, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
You tie it off after you wrap the eyes, you tie it off in the front?
Yeah, after you wrap it once behind the eyes, and do a figure 8 over the eyes to the front, and then tie it off in front of the eyes. I'm going to step through another one here in just a second, as soon as I grab a set of eyes. Uh-oh, what happened?
Broke my thread.
You just, when you wrap in Estaz, you make one wrap around behind.
One wrap around behind the eyes to cover the thread, and then do just one figure 8 forward over the eyes.
Over the eye.
Yeah, over and one around. Come on up with it. And now go forward over the front.
And tie it off there.
Uh-huh.
A one wrap in front.
You can figure 8 both sides if you want.
Oh, is it chartreuse thread?
Yeah.
No, it's not pink.
Yeah. Well, you don't give me so much grief about my pink thread.
It works. I do it on everything now. I like the hot spot.
All right, we'll step through one more here in just a minute. Let everybody get finished.
So Bill, when you're getting the second piece of the marabou
Uh-huh.
off, did you just, I didn't see what you did there, but you just take it and strip it off like this? Because I found I had a whole lot of extra long stuff like we were talking about earlier. When
Yeah.
we started. It had to be evened out.
Yeah,
with
what
the body of the marabou.
what I do is take it and kind of brush it all down. Oh, this is not a very good piece. It's got a broken shaft on it. Kind of brush it all down, and then I reach around, turn it sideways, and reach around and pull both sides. Now,
Pull both sides at the same time.
both sides at the same time, yeah, and that gives, it just basically folds the feather over on itself, and then when you grab it, you've got a pretty nice
Yeah, okay.
thick piece, very much like the tip.
Then you grab it off or strip it off?
I strip it off and then trim it. Yeah, you just strip it. And I'll do this one that way as well, so you can see it again. And I'm zoomed out here a little bit, so you can see the whole thing a little bit better.
I'll tell you what, I like the TV a lot better than the projector.
Yeah, it's a lot
Oh,
clearer.
that's clear.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
just easy to see.
Yep. All right, let me zoom back in there a little bit, and we're ready for a second copy out there. I think just about, okay. I'll go ahead and get my hook in.
Close.
All right. All right, second copy, we're all on second copy. All right, I'm laying a thread base down. I think we've got that part down. And then I'm bringing my thread back forward to about 1.5 eye lengths back, behind the eye. Stay right there just a second. All right. And then we hold our eyes at an angle. Take 3 or 4 snug but not too tight wraps, then straighten them out, level them and straighten them out. And then a few wraps in the other direction. And then I'm figure eighting across the top, like so. And then I'm going to do my stirrup wraps over the top of the eye, under the hook, to the other side, over the top, under, over the top, under. And then the cinch wrap horizontal on top of the hook, but under the eyes. And you can cinch it. I'm using Vivas's power thread, which is really a strong thread, so you can cinch it down pretty tight. You need some marabou. Okay. Now, I like a little bit thicker tail, and so this is my natural marabou tip. I'm going to take my thumb and just prune that back till I get closer to the thicker part of the feather. So I like a slightly thicker feather. And it makes the ends kind of curl a little bit when you do that, but when you get it in the water, it straightens right back out. So it gives me a little bit thicker tail. And so I measure about 1.5 lengths, and I'm going to trim it right there. Couple of wraps, and then wrap back to about the barb. And then leave my thread about the hook point. If you've not used these B10s stinger hooks, they're great. I mean, what is it, 12 is the smallest, Jim, is that right?
14.
There's 14s? I think the smallest I have is 12.
They got 14.
Yeah, and all the way up to 1/0 or maybe even 2/0, I don't know.
They got 2 off.
2/0.
Is that about the same as a mosquito hook?
I don't-
think so, Carl. I got some.
See, the mosquito hook has a little bit up curve
In the front.
at the bend.
Uh-huh.
In other words, it goes down a little bit more and then up.
And comes back up. Yeah, this is called a stinger hook. Has that kind of upturned point. And I know it's a real strong hook because that grinnell I caught was six pound, whatever it was.
Yeah, that's on the hook I use.
And that was a number 4 hook, and the wire looks fairly thin on it, but it didn't it didn't bend it at all. Okay, all right, so Estaz time. Trim, just strip a little bit of that fiber off to expose the core. Tie down the core and wrap back to right at our marabou tail, and then wrap forward to behind the eye. So I've tied the Estaz that back all the way to the tail, and then took my thread forward to just behind the eyes.
You do it now?
I do one. Oh, watch on TV.
Okay. And let's wrap the Estaz forward.
I'll get my hands going back
to right behind the eye. And don't crowd the eye with it. Just as soon as you reach the eye, go ahead and give it a couple of good wraps. And I'm going to zoom out here so you can see what I do with that. Whoops, wrong direction. See what I do with that marabou. Okay, this is the marabou I use for the tail. So I'm going to use these feathers down at the bottom for my wing. So just fold that feather over on itself, and then just grab a bunch and strip it, and now you have a nice clump of really fluffy marabou. Now that's probably too thick. You see it's a lot thicker than the tail, so I'm going to take some of those fibers out of there. And that looks about right. I want it about the same length as the tail. So I'll trim there. Make sure your thread gets a good grip on that marabou, because it will come out. The first copy of this fly I tied, I was stroking it like this, and all the marabou came out. So
If you back tie your go underneath the marabou,
you could,
stitch between the.
yeah, you could. It'd make it a little thick there, though, but I don't think it's. I mean, you could actually put some head cement here as well, or UV or super glue too. Matter of fact, this wouldn't be a bad place to drop a little super glue in. So now I'm taking I've tied the marabou in. I'll take my thread forward in front of the eyes to right behind the eye of the hook. And we'll stay here for just a second until everybody gets wings on. Looks good, Chris. Looks good.
Cut my Estaz in the front, off before going around to the front.
Oh,
I got,
made it a little short.
well, it was anticipatory cut. That was,
start breathing.
Get a little piece of Estaz about that long.
Yeah, here's a whole package, Mike. All right, so now with my Estaz, I take one wrap behind the eyes, and then over in front, across and over in front, and then under the far side and back across. So I make a figure 8 to cover the eye thread, and take a few wraps, and then trim my Estaz.
it's easier to have a table, you have to have more rice, would make you nail really basic. But when you lay the wires across there,
And then
steel rule.
half hitching again. Jim, I need a half hitch on my goober bugs.
I do, because it heads on. I watched somebody the other night just talk about putting super glue on the thread. make 2 wraps and a half.
So
Okay.
it'll shine in there and
Not even
whatever.
interested.
I've been looking for angel.
Now, on this size fly, you could, this is a number 8, you could certainly use petite Estaz on it if you want a little slimmer body. But I think this bushiness will do just fine in the water. I don't like that head sticking up. I'm going to trim that a little bit.
A lot of times I've had bushy stuff, I hit it with a cigarette lighter in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be careful, but
Yeah,
it'll burn it off then.
do a little head cement again here. And that is it. It's about it's a quick little tie. But like I said, Jeff, I think super glue on top of the marabou, because if you pull on that, it'll probably come out. On the marabou wing, a little super glue, and maybe even on the eyes. But after that, with that, it should be pretty durable. And of course, if you want to play around, add some legs to it, and then it's no longer a cat's whisker. So
That's how,
no longer a cat's whisker. Add a few legs on each side, and
Then it's the whole cat. Yeah.
it would be. Yes, you're right. It would be the entire cat. That's right. All right, how are my zoomers doing? Okay. Good flip.
great fly.
Yeah, it's a nice quick tie, and I think it looks. I put it in my pool. I haven't fished it yet, but I put it in my pool, and it looks really good under the water.
Really
And,
nice, Bill. Thank you.
all right, thanks, Mark. And yeah, some lead eyes if you want to get deeper with it. 'Cause this is pretty light. It would just run right under the surface, I think, with this.
Yeah, I took 4 plumes in it.
Yeah.
I thought that's